this into a, I don't want to turn this whole thing into a webinar on board governance because that's not our work. But I will say that board members clearly need to be trained to do their job. And again, the question I'm poking at today is, are we giving them the right job to do? And does the model support them in doing that job well? Topher, you've got the last bite at this apple, and then we're going to move on.
At the risk of sort of exploding the concept, I'm curious to what degree this is a problem with leadership in general, and not just in terms of boards. We're talking about how a volunteer board member can't possibly know as much as someone who's working at 40 hours a week. I would also point to that I don't think any CEO knows everything that goes on in their organization.
Yeah,
Any kind of leadership will require some sort of trust and navigation and sort of supervising in an area that you don't fully understand.
yeah. So I think that's a fair critique. And, since our topic today is structure, then the question is, do the structures we have support what you just said or not? And if not, then how do we make those structures support that better? So thank you, everyone. That was pretty interesting. We're going to proceed here. Let's talk a little bit about the volunteerism piece of this. Volunteerism has been declining in the US for quite a while. And this has to do with the fact that the economy is different. People have to work multiple jobs. There's not enough support for families in terms of things like childcare. There's also a decline, and this goes back decades, to people joining things. Some of you might remember a book from Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone, which I think was 2002 maybe. And Putnam talked about, this is his academic area of study, is social isolation. One of the pieces of data somebody gave me recently is that there is a social isolation or loneliness epidemic in this country. I think it probably extends beyond the US. The health effects of social isolation are something like smoking half a pack of cigarettes a day. That's what it does to your physical body. So we are seeing a trend where people are more isolated. I think social media has something to do with this, because people's lives are moving online. And then, we're still seeing the effects of COVID and people recovering from that kind of social isolation. In terms of philanthropy, long term, we've seen a growth in giving, but we've also seen a decline in the percentage of households that give to nonprofits. When I started fundraising, this had been around 1980, about 70% of American households gave to nonprofit organizations. That number has declined to closer to 50%. So there's been this gradual erosion of the percentage of households that give. Again, this has to do with the change in the economy. And I think it also has to do with declining trust in nonprofit structures. The other thing that's happened, and we've all been part of this, is we've seen the emergence of crowdfunding, where people give to other people or other causes, most of whom do not have 501c3 status. I'll give you an example of this in a second. And so there's lots of ways for people to give money outside of traditional nonprofits. We did have a big tax law change about 5 or 6 years ago that reduced the incentives to give. We've got the new tax law, and we'll see how that affects giving. And as I said, we've seen a loss of trust in institutions across the board. Nonprofits, in general, are still the most trusted institutions in the US, but the trust in us has declined. And, there's been institutions have taken a battering, and we are not immune from that. So here's a story from my community. There were major floods 2 summers ago in Montpelier, Vermont, which is about 10 miles from where I live. The whole downtown was flooded. And there was a huge effort of volunteers to come and clean up and raise money. It was entirely impressive. Many, many local businesses put up their own GoFundMes and said, please support my business so I can come back. They raised about $500,000 in this small town. Montpelier is a community of 8,000 people. And they raised $500,000 with no tax exemption, with no charitable status. And the idea that you need to have a 501c3 in order to raise money, I think that has been eroding steadily for a while. And it does give you certain advantages for sure. But what I see is people all the time who want to start a new nonprofit, and they assume once they get a C3, it's magic and they're going to access all this money they couldn't get otherwise. And I'm less and less convinced that that's true. So I'm going to give you a bunch of ideas and tools and strategies for how we might rebuild the sector to look differently. However, before we do that, before I sort of reveal all my cards and show you all the tricks, I want to give you a chance to talk to each other. So if you were going to rethink the nonprofit universe, if you were going to think differently about the structures, what changes would you make? And the warning I'll give you here is when I've done this in the past, in person and also online, sometimes these conversations devolve to people complaining about their boards and how their boards aren't doing their job. That's not really what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for, if you are going to rebuild the nonprofit sector in a different way, what would that look like? And if you're scratching your head and you're like, I don't know, then I totally respect that. But I want to give you a chance to talk with each other for a few minutes about this. So we're going to queue up the first breakout of the day. And I assume you've done a Zoom breakout by now, but if not, you'll be invited into a room with 3 or 4 other people. We're going to give you about 5 minutes on this. So this is going to be fairly quick. Please say hello and introduce yourself. Don't tell everybody your entire mission statement because that will eat up the 5 minutes. But if you have thoughts on this subject, we'd love to hear it. And we'll go ahead and drop this question into the prompt as well. So Allison, when you're ready, please open the breakouts.
Okay, here we go.
And we'll see you all back here in about 5 minutes. And of course, if you want to hang out in the main room with us, you're welcome to, but encourage you to join your colleagues and have a conversation. And Allison, we should pause the recording at this point.
I am not able to pause the recording. I wonder if you can or Jackie can.
You can try.
If you can put me in a breakout, that would be great.
Sure.
Buddy, hope you had an interesting and productive conversation. If you have any thoughts or responses or ideas you want to post in chat, I mean, this is great because other people can hear about what you were talking about in your group. So if you're moved to add a note in chat or summarize or pose another question based on the question we gave you, that's all helpful. So please go for that. And we're going to encourage you to mute and, share, as I say, whatever it is you came up with. Would love to hear what's got your attention so far. So where we're going here is I'm going to give you 3 levels of change in this model. We're going to talk about ways that you can tweak or adjust or hack the current 501c3 model. We're going to talk about how nonprofits might rethink their governance structures. And then we'll talk about other things that exist outside the 501c3 that groups are using to create social change. And in all these cases, I have a number of specific examples I will share with you. As a reminder, we will send you the slide deck afterward. Happy to share that with you. We can also save the chat log and send that out because there might be some good resources in chat you're sharing with each other. So that'd be great. So In terms of tweaks and hacks, here's an interesting thing. My colleague Crystal Cherry found it's a group in Georgia called Project Chimps. They are a chimp sanctuary for retired chimps. And their model is their sort of interesting innovation is they have couples who share a board seat. So it's essentially one vote per family, and one spouse or the other covers the meeting. Sometimes they come together, but this allows busy families, often with parents, often who are parents, to actually split the responsibilities of serving on a board. And if you're trying to get your board to get younger, or you're trying to make it more accessible to people who are really busy, this is a model that's worth considering. And she said of the people she interviewed, she talked to a number of board members who are doing this. She said one of the interesting things was it led to these really interesting dinner table conversation with their kids. And, they ended up talking about the mission of the organization and what the group was doing. And so it became this sort of family activity that they could all do together. So speaking of younger, here's a group in Baltimore called Youth as Resources, and their board is entirely young people. I mean, their model is they are a grant maker. They collect money from larger foundations and they re-grant it in smaller chunks to community projects. And all of the money goes towards youth-led projects, some of which I don't believe are 501c3s. And the rule is there's nobody on the board over the age of 25 years old. So they have 23 people on the board, age 14 to 24. And, this is literally walking the talk, right? If we want to empower youth, how do we do this? Well, we give them some money and we have them make choices about how that money is going to get spent and who decides where the money goes. And they've been doing this for 30 years now, and they have distributed over $1 million. So I think this is really an interesting and impressive model in terms of we're all trying to get younger. Like, how young do you want to get? Certainly, I'm a believer in fewer meetings. There are many organizations that go through the motion of having monthly meetings without having any decisions to make every month or any substantive conversations to have. So I think, you should look at your meeting model and saying, in terms of recruitment, are we actually asking more time of people than we need to be asking coming to meetings? Another trend I'm seeing is that there are fewer standing committees and there's more ad hoc work groups. People come together to do stuff. And when the stuff is done, the group just disbands. So maybe we have, instead of having a development committee or fundraising committee, we have people coming together to work on fundraising projects as needed. There's also an interesting model of doing seasonal committees. This speaks to fundraising specifically. It's something I learned from a colleague where the board divides itself into a spring team, a summer team, a fall team, and a winter team. And each board member commits to one of those teams. And then during that season, they do a fundraising project together. Maybe they organize a house party, or maybe they're organizing a mailing, or maybe they're doing a crowdfunding campaign. And so this sort of removes the idea that fundraising is perpetual for board members and they really have to double down for 3 months of the year and do it then. Now, the giant tweak that we all went through around COVID is moving meetings online. And I will say the accessibility piece of this cuts both ways. There are people who can participate remotely who can't physically come to a board meeting. So you're opening up a new potential pool of board members. Conversely, and I'm speaking from rural Vermont where internet is lousy, there are people who don't have adequate internet to join remotely and participate that way. So it sort of cuts both ways. And I would be curious about your current board meeting model. So we have a poll. How are you currently meeting? In person, 100%, online, 100%, a mix of both, like we do some meetings in person and some meetings online. Or we're doing hybrid meetings where some people are physically present and some people are joining remotely. So what's your current board meeting model in September 2025? Man, this is interesting. All right. So we have 40 responses, 20% in person, 13% online, 45% were doing some of each, 38% of you are doing hybrid meetings, where some people are physically present and some people are online. So I think the answer again today is all of the above. And I think that's adaptive, and that's sort of what this whole conversation is about. So thank you for participating. So I want to move into the second part of this, which is rethinking our governance models. And I'll quote a colleague who said, for equitable governance, the who drives the how, meaning if we don't have the right people in the room, the governance model is sort of irrelevant. And this is someone who argues very strongly for the idea that people with lived experience need to be in leadership in nonprofit organizations, right? If you are serving the homeless, you need to have people on the board who are currently unhoused or have had that experience. If you're an arts organization, you need to have working artists on your board, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's, for this person, my colleague, Renee Rubin Ross, for her, this is number one on the list as we are thinking about this. Now, this came to me from Bonnie Chavez, who's a consultant based in Virginia. And she was recruited somewhere in the Western US, I don't know specifically where. There was an organization that was developing housing for the Native American community. And they had been operating as a fiscally sponsored organization under somebody else's umbrella and decided to go out and get their own 501c3. And so they had to create bylaws. The problem is, in indigenous culture, Robert's rules is not how people make decisions. That's culturally inappropriate. And so they said, like, how do we create something that reflects our cultural values and shows how that we make decisions differently? And so they came up with a set of bylaws. There's no voting. There's no Robert's rules. There's actually nobody named president or chair. It's a different model. And a lot of it ended up being developed in terms of visuals. So, they have a steering committee at the center, which became their board, and they have various working groups, and then they have their general membership. And a lot of their 501c3 application consisted of these visuals that showed how they made decision and how they built their structure. And there was this sort of interesting question with, okay, we're going to send this thing in and it's not a traditional application. Can we get the federal government to approve it? And the answer is yes, they did. So there's nothing in the law that says you have to make decisions by Robert's rules, right? There's nothing in the law that says you have to have a hierarchical structure to do the work you do. And this is one case where they were trying to take their cultural values and fit it within a 501c3 structure, which they successfully did. So here's an example that's close to my heart. This is my local synagogue in Montpelier, Vermont, Beth Jacobs Synagogue. You are looking at the person who served as board president for 4 years. And my tenure as board president coincided with COVID, and then it coincided with the attacks of October 7th, 2023, and all the chaos that created in the Jewish community, and it was a lot. And I was originally supposed to be president for 3 years, and I extended for a year for a variety of reasons. And as soon as I let people know I was going to step down, the vice president said, no, thank you, and left the board. And we sort of knew that was going to happen. And I'm like, who's going to be the next president? Who's going to be the next president? And nobody wanted to follow me. And this is partly on me because I was working way too hard and people saw how hard I was working and they didn't want to, or they didn't have the time to do what I was doing. So at one point, one of the board members said, do you have a job description? I said, not really. And they said, could you write it down? And I said, totally. So I wrote down everything I was doing as president, and it ended up being like 5 or 6 categories. There was organizing the board meetings. There was communication with the members. There was supervising our one employee, or perhaps overseeing our one employee. And there were 3 or 4 other categories. And I gave to the board, and their idea was, why don't we take your job and break it up into 5 or 6 jobs? And instead of having one president, why don't we have a lateral structure that spreads that work across the board? So I'm like, good on you. Let's try this. And they ran the experiment for a year. The experiment is actually working quite well. And as of last June, they changed the bylaws to reflect the fact that we no longer have a president and we have a lateral management structure. So if you're having a hard time getting people to step up and be leadership within your board, one thing to think about is maybe the leadership model needs to be built differently. And it's become less of a top-down thing and more of a workers' collective. And, we're like a year and a half into the experiment at this point, and it seems to be working reasonably well. And nobody has to be president, which has made recruitment for the board much easier. So this is in Portland, Oregon. SVP is Social Venture Partners. They are a philanthropy. They give money away. And a lot of their work was going to progressive work, economic justice, racial justice, social justice, but it was very top down. And so they thought, well, why don't we invite all of our grantees to serve on the board? That would be the solution. So they went out to their grantees, and the grantees are like, no, thank you. We don't have the time. We don't want the responsibility. We just want the money. We don't actually want to run the organization. We don't have the capacity to do that. So what they decided to do is they created a series of essentially working groups. They call them dynamic teams that include both board members and grantees and other partners. And so an example here, this is the last bullet, is they wanted to do deeper advocacy work, but they weren't sure how far to go or what the boundaries should be or how they should be doing that. And so they pulled together a team, including some board members and a lot of their grantees, and said, solve this advocacy question for us. Give us some guidelines. Give us some policy. And the deal was this group was empowered to make decisions. And so whatever they decided, the board would approve, period. So, they've moved to this minimum functioning board model, which is what's the minimum we can do as a board to be compliant with the law. And how do we take a lot of our power and share it out to the networks that we work in a way that literally empowers them to make decisions for the organization. So this is and again, the board tend to be people with a fair amount of resources, money, power, privilege, and they are consciously disempowering themselves and pushing that power out into the community. Now, I'm going to share one more, and then I'll take a pause and see if we have questions. Did your screen just go away? There it is. I lost it for a minute, but we're good. This is a really interesting group in California called the Southern Economies Law Center. They're in Oakland. And this is a quote from their website. What do you get when you cross a worker cooperative with a 501c3 nonprofit? And this is who they are. And what they have is something they call worker self-directed nonprofits. They are a legal support organization. They're sort of a legal aid organization. They work in housing, they work in food security, they work in energy, employment, all sorts of fields. They have a 30-hour work week. They have an equitable wage model. And what that means is people get paid what they need, not necessarily what their job title would be. So, if you have 2 people in the same job title, it's like I'm freezing up here. I'm going to try and share again. While I'm doing that, I'll tell you about the group.
You need me to share, Andy?
I think I got it.
Okay.
I apologize for that. We had a little glitch here, but there's no webinar without a glitch. That's sort of how this works. All right, so Beautiful. All right. I think it's back. Give me a thumbs up if you see it.
It's back.
Nice. So as I mentioned, they have an equitable wage model. I don't necessarily understand this language, but they have something called semi-autonomous circle of staff and volunteers nested within a larger circle of accountability. And so the way to think about this is concentric circles in terms of who makes decisions. They have a 6-member board that includes 2 staff members, and they're in California. This is legal under California law. And in fact, the president of the board and the secretary of the board are employees of the organization. And so they have consciously put the staff in leadership roles within the board. So in effect, using the language again, they have a workers' collective, a workers' cooperative, but it's nested within a 501c3 structure. They are so committed to this model that they get some revenue training other nonprofits how to do this. And if anyone's curious about this, go to their website. There are tutorials, there are webinars. There's a lot of information about if you want to create an equitable workplace where workers are managing the workplace and serving on the board, this is a model that you can use. So I'm giving you lots of content here. I want to pause for a second, and because I'm going to go to the next phase, but I want to see if there are other questions that people have on anything I presented so far. And Allison, this is a chance to feed me anything from chat.
Yeah, folks are wondering if the staff are paid for their time to serve on the board.
Well, an excellent question. I don't know. I think it's part of their job. I mean, the answer, my understanding would be yes. I mean, it's if they're serving as both a staff member and a board member, I think the board meeting time and such happens on the organization's nickel. I assume they're being paid for that time. It's a great question. I don't know, but I think so. Other questions about any of these models? All right, I'm going to proceed here. The third strategy is what exists outside of the 501c3 altogether. Like, how else could we organize ourselves? One interesting model is the New England Grassroots Environment Fund. Some of you folks know these people. They're based in New Hampshire, but they serve all of New England. And they are getting grants and funding to informal organizations that are at the very grassroots level. The average budget size of the organization they serve here is $17,000. These are all volunteer groups for the most part. They don't have employees. Half of the groups they fund are not 501c3s. They're informal groups of people who've come together primarily to do local work. And here's, an example of some of these groups. And what I would have you notice if you look carefully is that 3 of the 5 groups listed here are people of color-led organizations. And the model, neighbors helping neighbors, local people doing local work with other local people is something you see in all communities. And these folks are close to my heart simply because I see a lot of good work happening at a local level around wherever I work. And these folks are literally below radar. One estimate is about half of what we would call nonprofit organizations are all volunteer unstaffed organizations. So they have made a point over the last 30 years now of trying to direct resources to this very grassroots level of community work. Now, fiscal sponsorship is not a new model. It's been around for years. This is the idea that one organization nests inside of another organization and uses their 501c3 and takes advantage of their board or governance model so they don't have to create their own governing board. And 2 organizations that do a lot of this are TSNE, which is based in Boston, and the Tide Center, which is based in San Francisco. But a lot of organizations could serve as fiscal sponsors if they wanted to. And when people come to me and say, I want to start a new nonprofit, my first advice is don't do it. We have enough. Like, find other ways to organize yourself. And this is one option. And usually this is a temporary process on the way to getting your own 501c3. But I know of some organizations that have existed for 20 or more years in a fiscally sponsored situation. And one advantage of this is you don't have to create your own board. You're operating using the board of their fiscal sponsor. And you probably need an advisory group or some group to help you do your work. So I think there is potential to expand this. One version of this, and I don't have a slide up here, but it's been a conversation in the last several years, is can we combine back offices? Can we have common accounting systems or common databases? Or can we have a common HR system so that we're not all paying for that? And this is a flavor of what I'm talking about here. Now, the other thing to think about is that maybe there are some nonprofits that could be for-profit businesses. And where you look at nonprofit revenue, something like 40 to 50% of nonprofit revenue is earned revenue. A lot of the people on this call, they charge for their services, right? You're charging for medical care, or you're charging for training, or you're charging for housing, or you're charging for arts programs and people are paying tickets to come and do it, right? Or you're charging landowners to help them protect their land, right? And so does nonprofit status open up different funding possibilities? 100%. That's absolutely true. But one could be a for-profit business and continue to make change in the community. And so I'm real curious about this. I mean, I wrote a book about this subject like 25 years ago, and it's something I have been sitting with for a long time. But maybe more of us should be social purpose businesses or some sort of hybrid. So give you an example here. Here's a really interesting group in Seattle. They're called Fair Start. Fair Start provides culinary training for people, often people who are unhoused, often people with substance abuse disorder, to get them into the workforce. And they've been around for like 30 years now. The history of this organization is they actually started as a for-profit organization. There was somebody who had a catering business and thought, I'm going to start supporting people getting into the workforce. And then it was hard to do as a for-profit, but when they switched to nonprofit, they were able to get some subsidy through donations and grants. They are massive. They have a couple of restaurants. They have literally put 18 million meals into the community. They have gotten so good at their training program that they are training other nonprofits around North America to set up similar culinary training programs based on their model. They have an entire consulting division that supports, it's like a franchise model. It's like, here's the structure, and we're going to teach you our franchise model, and you're going to do it in your community, and you're going to pay us some money to teach you the model. So they are generating fees from 250 clients across the United States using their job development and placement model. So, I'm calling this a nonprofit with for-profit DNA. I think there's a lot of us out there who think this way. And in this case, they are structured as a nonprofit, but they are behaving in many ways like a for-profit organization, trying to monetize their expertise in the work they do. I am also on the board of our local food co-op, and many of you belong to food cooperatives. These are member-owned for-profit businesses, many of which have a social mission. In our case, in the last year and a half, we just bought the local hardware store, and we now have grocery and hardware and a cafe and a greenhouse all under one roof. It was a major lift. Sometime you can ask me. It was one of the hardest jobs I've ever done as a board member. But, we are supporting the local economy. We're buying food from local farmers. We're sourcing organic food for people who can't get it. We're trying to serve the whole community. And so, it's very entrepreneurial, but it's 100% has a social mission. And we also were able to do, I just facilitated a capital campaign for a for-profit business, which is something I'd never done in all these years, and we managed to succeed in doing it. So this is another example of what I'm talking about. There is a structure for this. Some of you know about B Corp, which is a certification program for-profit businesses who have, the famous triple bottom line, which is profit, people, and planet. Meaning they're trying to make money. They want to make sure the people they engage with, their members, their customers, their employees are well treated, and they also want to be environmentally responsible. And this is pretty rigorous. And there are a number of B Corps out in the world, and this is a structure that's expanding. But the idea is that, okay, if you're going to be in business, can you do it in a way that's socially and ethically and environmentally responsible? And here are some metrics. And if you want the certification, you have to be measured against these metrics. So you just got a peek of, a big chunk of the last couple of years of my life trying to figure this stuff out. The research continues, right? This, as you can tell from my tone of voice, I am curious and interested and pretty enthusiastic about this. So if you have any thoughts or comments, or you have ideas, or maybe your organization is playing with the structure or playing with the governance model, or thinking about how to tweak it and make it better, I would love to know more about that. So let us pause. I'm going to warn you, in a little while, we're going to go into breakouts, and I'm going to ask you to talk with each other about what you learned and what you might want to implement coming out of today. But before we do that, do you have any questions about anything you heard or any comments? Chat is good, but we have a minute. So if you want to raise your hand, just raise your Zoom hand or wave your physical hand around. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I can tell you that Melanie Redding had shared in the chat that her organization's starting to look at forming a collaborative fiscal sponsorship model with aligned groups to share services. I don't know if she'd like to tell us a little bit more about that.
Melanie, you're muted. No, we can't hear you.
No?
Sorry.
No, how about now?
Now, yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't know what the issue was. This is something that some of the groups in the North Country have been discussing, whispering, I think, more than discussing, at the fact, those of us, especially with the new executive orders that are working in areas of DEI, and the funding has becoming very difficult for all the obvious reasons and more, that there could be a very strong benefit for these smaller groups that are usually, lack capacity and funding with big goals coming together to look at having a larger fiscal sponsor that allows the groups to do their individual work, but with shared services from accounting, payroll, insurance, etc. And that also might lead to the ability to access some larger funds too, and leverage the different programs that the organizations do for impact. So this is a conversation that I'm kind of pushing right now to have.
I support your pushing, so thank you for doing that. Other thoughts, questions, observations about this, about anything we've talked about today?
I have a bunch because I'm wearing so many hats right now. But in my job as director of membership and events for a nonprofit, we are actually kind of the lead organization in forming a volunteer engagement group of multiple nonprofits in the area to try and just increase volunteer engagement and figure out how we can work together to create a system that supports all of the nonprofits in the region who want that kind of support to increase their volunteer engagement. So we're still, in our nascent stages. We haven't figured out any solutions yet, but we're working toward that. And then I also just wanted to share that as, this I've mentioned a couple times, I founded an organization this year, and we have fiscal sponsorship from a nonprofit, and it's been a dream because I don't have to worry, all the accounting stuff. And I also have someone to review all my grant applications, which is great. But then also we've formed several collaborations with other orgs, and one of them is HelpSee, which is a B Corp, and they're just fully aligned with what we're trying to do. So it's been really great to work with them, and then a bunch of other nonprofits and for-profits.
Well, thank you for that work. Appreciate it. Anyone else want to jump in here? Nice. Jackie, thank you for posting that. That's great.
I have a question briefly on the board without a president getting rid of that.
Yes.
So unfortunately, our board president, he passed away last year, and nobody has wanted to really step into that role. He was kind of your textbook, great, incredible board chair. And I think people are actually intimidated to kind of go into that role. So this is really interesting to me. Did you still have a treasurer and secretary, or was that kind of broken off into committees or ad hoc?
Yeah, yes and yes. So the way it currently works is instead of having a president, they just decided on the words co-directors, which is a little confusing because it sounds like staff, but they're using the word co-directors. And so these are the lead people. There is someone with the job title treasurer. There is someone with the job title secretary, 100%. And some of that work has been dispersed to the various work groups. So the answer is both and. And the change to the bylaws was that president was removed and co-directors was put in. And I don't think anything else was changed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, have fun with it. I mean, it's
my wheels are turning.
I mean, and I was sort of that guy. Like nobody wanted to follow me, and I created that problem because of my own over functioning.
Yeah, it's like a good problem to have at the moment until you leave.
Yeah, and I mean, like I gave them 2 years notice, and they just did not want to do it. So I'm glad that the board came up with Plan B, and as I say, I think it's worth exploring. So thank you for raising that. Last call. Any other questions you want to answer? Because I want to give you a chance to actually talk with each other.
I just had one thought. Was for a lot of nonprofits, it's everything that they can do to operate the soup kitchen or, run a shelter, and to ask them to be good at recruiting, training, and supporting board members is a step too far. And to me, that's where the entire 501c3 structure breaks down. And state law and federal law requires fiduciaries to sit on a board, usually at least 2, and in Connecticut at least 3. There's a whole system. So we're not getting rid of that. And it feels to me there's a real gap in the sector around creating this pipeline of well-educated, directed volunteers. And if intermediaries could take that role over, and I'm looking at Jackie and thinking about community foundations and thinking about these intermediary structures, and get really expert at it so that there were incentives built into the system to encourage people to volunteer. There were professional recruitment techniques used. I actually have a client that hires a headhunter to find their board members and pays a headhunter because they only want C-suite level people, and they get amazing. They get the CEO of JetBlue. They get great people, right? And then puts them through a boot camp so that these well-intended volunteers have a shared understanding of what their job is when they arrive into the board seat. I think that helps to triage all of the problems built into the system that is the 501c3. And I feel like it can't be on the shoulders of nonprofits who need to operate their shelters and their soup kitchens. It has to rest somewhere else in the sector in a consistent, funded, reliable way. Otherwise, the sector is just going to continue to crumble.
So I'm going to support you 90% on this, Jen, and I'm going to raise two modest critiques. Critique number one, having trained a lot of board members, the number one attribute for being a good board member is passion for the mission. You got to love the mission of the organization. All the other stuff, your financial skills, your ambassador skills, all of that is necessary, but it's subsidiary to your commitment. And if you have some outside group doing board matching, my fear is that you're going to get some board members who get dropped onto the board who aren't actually embedded in the mission of the organization. I think that's a solvable problem, but it's something I would think about.
Yeah, I think it's solvable. I think you can let them self-select to the boards to a certain degree.
Yeah. I mean, the other piece of this, and we talked about this earlier, is I want board members with lived experience. And, you know, depending on your mission, whether the C-suite folks have the relevant lived experience is a separate question.
Yeah, but Andy, I'm not arguing that your entire board be C-suite. I mean, every board is different and
right.
Can build that into the system too. I just think that there's such a tremendous loss for an organization when you get a board that don't know each other, don't know how to relate to each other, don't know what their jobs are. It's in my experience, it's a 3-year startup time between governance training and them functioning in a coherent collective. I mean, it takes so long to get them, and then somebody moves or dies or goes and does another charity or is term limited off. So these nonprofits that are trying to do these amazing things are constantly hamstrung by the developmental needs of their board that are constantly changing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a crisis.
Yeah, I think it's a fair critique. I'm sorry, Melanie.
I just wanted to add one thing to that, which I totally appreciate everything Jen has said, because in our small group, we talked a lot about kind of the exhaustive care and feeding of a board of directors that an ED has to do. Like half of their time has to kind of be devoted to that if they're going to have a really high functioning governance structure. But I'm interested in all of the models that you've presented, Andy. They're all have like a piece of the puzzle kind of that kind of seems to like potentially fix things. But one of the things that I've experienced and also urged other organizations I consult with to do is to create, and this kind of goes to the issue of nobody's like joining groups anymore for the last 20 years, like the whole joining thing has dissipated, is to create a very, very informal community advisory group that can just be, you know, their whole purpose can just be answer the phone when we call you and ask you for advice. Right. And they could potentially become like the pool for the board, but also the pasture. And that's how we used to frame it, the pool and the pasture. So you have the pool of people that you're building up and exposing to the organization, but you're not losing all of that effort you put into those people, especially around fundraising, by having a place for them to go the pasture afterwards as ex officio or whatever. So that seems to have also addressed some of the issues we're talking about recruitment and retention of board members. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
I like this, and I will see you and raise you a little bit. One of the mistakes I see consistently is nonprofits who have all these webs of relationships, right? They have clients, they have donors, they have partners, all of that is when they're looking for board members, they go and they pluck total strangers out of the atmosphere and say, will you be on our board, right? Yeah. Which is insane. It's like, why aren't you using the networks of people who are already connected? So what you just gave us, Melanie, and I think, you know, it's again, a textbook good idea, is let's build those networks both before and after people are on the board so that we have people we can bring on, but also we don't lose their wisdom when they're gone. So thank you for that. Definitely the consultants are in the house today. I see you. All right. So I'm going to go back to the deck and I'm going to send you off for the final conversation of the day. Share this again, see if it works. Good. I want to know, move for me, there we go, coming back. I want to know what you want to learn more about. And I want to know, is there anything you heard today that you would actually like to try to use? So these are your two breakout questions. Like, what are you curious about and what might you implement? So we're going to set up another round of breakouts. You'll be invited into a room for 3 or 4 people. We're doing great on time. So let's give you about, I don't know, 8, 9 minutes, something like that. We're going to shuffle the deck. So you'll end up with some, for the most part, with some different folks in the first time. And talk to each other about this. What do you want to know more about? Is there anything you learned today that you would like to try to implement? So Allison, when you're ready, we'll send it off. And Jackie, if you're the one doing the stop recording, please do that. Everybody back. So while you all were gone, Jackie said, and I think we'll come to this later, Jackie said, we really need to hear from people on this. Like, what do you want to learn more about? What do you want to lean into? What, you know, and the reason is because it's potential programming for the foundation, and it helps to inform how they can serve the nonprofit community better, acknowledging that some of you are not in the greater New Haven area, and that's fine. But anyone who's willing to drop into chat, something you're curious about, something you want to learn more about, something you want to try and implement, and or unmute and raise your hand and tell us, that would be very good. So who's out there? Talk to us.
Hi, Andy. This is Genevieve.
Genevieve, I'm listening.
Wonderful. So I was intrigued when you shared this idea of a model that really spreads the ownership and leadership across the board. But I'm thinking in my role as an executive director, but also as my other roles as board chair and my other roles on other boards where it can be a heavy lift. And, you know, when we're talking about volunteers that are stepping in to do considerable work, that is a model that I would love to know more about. I don't know in which setting it would work the best, but I'm very curious about really distilling the leadership responsibilities and spreading that out over a number of individuals. Very curious.
Topic number 1, lateral leadership. Sweet. Anybody else? Something you want to learn more about, something you want to try and implement? And, you know, again, Allison, if you're seeing anything in chat, feel free to feed it back to us.
This is Rebecca Sales chiming in. A thought that literally just popped into my head, was not part of our breakout session, but what about considering co-leadership on the staff level? How that's working out for organizations, or lateral leadership across staff.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and there's been definitely more movement in that direction. I'm interacting with a lot more groups that have co-directors or leadership teams instead of CEOs. Cool, these are good. Anybody else want to offer?
I'm Halima Flynn here. I've been really intrigued by companies that are sort of treading both the nonprofit for-profit metrics, and like, how is that broken down? How is that working? How's that organized? And like having to have the requirements of bylaws, but still operating somewhat as a for-profit is curious to me.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Halima. Good. Yeah, we are seeing some stuff in chat too, so that's helpful, people. I appreciate that. And, you know, feel free to read along. I would say last call, and then we'll sort of do the outro. Is there anything else people want to offer? Anything you learned? Anything you want to learn more about? I mean, I will say this. There has been some concern in the nonprofit space about nonprofits losing their 501c3 status for political reasons. And, you know, there was a law, some of you were aware of this, there was a law introduced in Congress last year, which was informally called the Kill Nonprofit Act. That was the actual name, which would have given the Secretary of the Treasury the ability to revoke nonprofits' 501c3 status by designating them as terrorist, quote unquote, organizations. And it didn't go anywhere at the time, thankfully, and there was a lot of advocacy against it, but that's out there lurking. And so I think part of my interest in this conversation is, can we learn to do our work without having to be sanctioned by the federal government to do the work? And what would that look like? And that's a large question, but this webinar points at some possible avenues for thinking about that. So I don't think that's the primary topic today, but there's something that's out there sort of floating in the ether. And I think it's something we need to keep paying attention to. And I'm a big fan of the National Council of Nonprofits, which is a DC advocacy organization that's looking out for all of us. And they've been paying very close attention to what's happening in Congress regarding all manner of things that might affect us. So if you're curious about that, you can go to their website, National Council of Nonprofits. Their director, Diane Yantel, is excellent, and they've done good work. All right, as we're wrapping, I'll show you a couple more slides. Allison, do you have any announcements? Is there any other programs you want to tell people about as we're doing this?
Well, for everyone who is interested in training for boards, I want to remind the group that you are coming to Connecticut. So
Right.
Andy will be presenting Building a Board That Works on September 26th. It's a full day workshop, and Andy can tell us a little bit more about it. But the idea is the morning is about governance, financial management, and the afternoon is about fundraising. So for those of you that, this is what your board needs, more training, more better understanding of their roles and responsibilities, come and join us in New
Excellent. Yeah. And I'm excited to see you all on the 26th. So come on down. As mentioned, the morning is about board recruitment, board decision-making, board governance, financial oversight. Afternoon is all about how do I get my board to raise money more effectively, which is the topic that never goes away. So come learn how. I put up a slide from one of my books. I'm the author of many books. This is, I guess, the most relevant one to this workshop. And then my contact info, actually wrong direction. So if you need to find me, this is one way you can find me. And if you have questions you want answered offline, maybe there's stuff you didn't feel comfortable bringing up in this context with a bunch of people, and you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to respond to your emails or spend a few minutes on the phone with you. And if I can be helpful, I will do so. Let me again thank Allison and Jackie for your support for this and your colleagues at the foundation. And then let me thank all of you for showing up. Your time is valuable. We're all really busy, and the fact that you invested 90 minutes in this topic is a big deal. So we're grateful for you. I think that's everything. So have a good afternoon wherever you are. We look forward to seeing you at the next of these.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you everyone for coming.